With OTAs set to kick off next week, Seattle's latest draft class will finally get to go on the field with the veterans and try to carve out a spot on the roster in the lineup. Which incoming rookies have the best shot to play right away? Going to be breaking it all down here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all of our valued listeners for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're in nearby North Bend, Washington, or in the middle of the country in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a special thanks to each and every one of you. We are drawing closer to the first OTA that's coming up early next week. Rookies and veterans will be on the field for the first time for off-season practices, at least football-related activities, with their helmets on as they go into the final phase of the off-season program. I'm going to be taking a look at which incoming draft picks have the best chance to potentially play early and contribute quite a bit as a rookie. I'll have the rankings for all 11 of those draft picks. And we're going to continue our OTA previews on offense, looking at an overhauled receiver room, where things stand going into OTAs, and then the linebacker position that has a lot more continuity than it had this time last year, but there's still plenty of questions. All that coming up here on a jam-packed episode, so let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. OTAs will finally kick off to bring the offseason program into the final phase next week. The Seahawks have 3 practices scheduled, with the first one being May 27th. This will be the first time that rookies and vets play together with helmets. They've obviously been doing offseason workouts here since rookie minicamp concluded, but they haven't gotten into the actual OTA practices. As close as you can get this time of year to real football. It's not real football, but it's as close as you can get. And with that being known, let's talk about which rookies have a chance to play a lot early. Every rookie comes into the league with different circumstances, and you're not going to be given a starting job, though first-round picks. Generally, you're being brought into play right away. That's not always the case, but every rookie's got different circumstances, different situations that they have to deal with. And the Seahawks, their draft picks, it's going to be easier for some of them to see the field early than it will be for others. So keeping that in mind, I put together a ranking of all 11 of Seattle's draft picks in terms of their ability or their chances to be able to contribute quite a bit as rookies. Let's start at the bottom of the list, shall we? And going to go at number 11, and this might surprise some people because my number 10 player, Riley Mills, we don't know when he's going to be back. So that obviously plays into this evaluation with him coming off a torn ACL. But I've got Mason Richmond coming in at number 11, the 7th-round pick out of Iowa. I just see it as being a significant challenge for him. Not to make the roster necessarily. I could see him making the 53-man roster. But Seattle's still very high on Mike Jarrell, their second-year player that he drafted in the 6th round out of Findlay last year. He started 4 games last season, coming from a Division II school, is really athletic. There's still optimism in the building that he's got a bright future. You've got a fully healthy Abraham Lucas, finally an off-season where he's healthy, going into the last year of his contract. And you just used the 5th-year option on Charles Cross. You're really excited about where he's going, still only 24 years old. So you've got those 3 players and Josh Jones, who they signed in free agency as their new swing tackle. All 4 of those players, in my opinion, are ahead of Mason Richmond right now. That could make it really tricky for him to not only be able to compete for playing time, but to make the roster. Again, I think it's possible he can make the team. I just think of the 11 picks with what he's got in front of him, it's going to be really difficult for him to see the field at all for the Seahawks, even if he makes the roster. It would take some injuries in front of him for that to happen. Coming in next to my list at number 10, I mentioned it, Riley Mills. The injury is the biggest factor here. If Riley Mills was healthy at the beginning of the season, I think that there's definitely room for him to play. The Seahawks lost Roy Robertson Harris in free agency. To me, Riley Mills would be the ideal rookie to come in and fill that void as a guy that can play multiple spots along the defensive line. And if he gets back healthy early or middle of the season, I could see him finding a way by the end of the year to get a pretty significant role in the rotation. We just don't know when he's going to be back. And at number 9, Bryce Cabledew, the guard out of Kansas, being the second guard that was drafted by Seattle in this draft in the 6th round, coming out of Kansas. Obviously, all expectations for Gray Zabel are extremely high. He's the one that's going to be getting that first shot to start a left guard. Can Cabledew make things interesting for Christian Haynes and Satoa Lamea at the right guard spot? It's not out of the question. This is a top-tier athlete that played really good competition in the Big 12 Conference, a multi-year starter, performed well at the East-West Shrine Bowl. I just think that those 3 players that listed there, though, it's going to be tough for him to get a starting job. Anthony Bradford's still on the roster as well. I just don't know that he is going to be a starter necessarily, but I can see him making this roster. I think he's got a chance to be one of 3 or 4 guards that make the roster for Seattle come September. I just think getting on the field, again, another one that I think injuries are going to happen to make that happen. And coming in at number 8, I have Jalen Milroe, and this might surprise some of our listeners. I've got him ahead of some of these other players just because of the sub-package capability. I don't know how much the Seahawks are planning to use him in that capacity, but I think that it would be malpractice if you didn't have some plays each week because of just how elite of an athlete he is. And the fact that he can throw the football is not a one-trick pony that when he comes in, Seattle's going to run the football. I just think that he's going to be a guy that's going to get some opportunities. I don't expect him to beat out Drew Lock or certainly Sam Darnold for the starting job, but I can see him getting a handful of snaps every week. That's going to be more than some of the guys that I mentioned. And coming in at 7, Ricky White. I don't know if Ricky White III gets many chances on offense. However, I think this kid is going to come in and be one of Seattle's core special teams players on day one. Not just the fact that he's got a history of blocking punts. This guy is a good kick and punt returner. He's a really good tackler. He's just a football player. And I think that he is going to cater himself well in that third phase of the game. And he'll do some things on offense to make it worth keeping him as a receiver as well. But this guy's a really good special teams player. From that aspect, I think that he's got a really good chance to contribute early for the Seahawks. As for the rest of Seattle's draft picks, Damian Martinez, the running back out of Miami and formerly of Oregon State, I've got him coming in at number 6. And even though he's got 3 established backs in front of him, I think Martinez has an opportunity to push for playing time on offense at 217 pounds with 4.51 speed, 6 yards per carry average in college, has big play capabilities, really good ball carrier vision. I think he's got a chance to crash that party potentially. So I've got him at number 6. Elijah Arroyo at number 5. I was kind of torn on this between him and Torrey Horton because both of these players are going to be entering position groups where there are some established veterans in front of them that maybe have some similarities skill set wise. I decided to put Torrey Horton the spot above, though, because I already look at his skill set and think he is a more balanced overall receiver than what Marquez Valdez-Scantling is. I think Horton's got a really good chance coming back healthy from the injury that cost him half his final season at Colorado State. I think he's got a shot to be that receiver number 3 behind Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I've got him ahead of Elijah Arroyo and maybe Noah Fant. Who knows? Maybe they're going to do something moving him at some point because Arroyo is a player they're really high on, but 2 very similar players in terms of their strengths. I just don't know how many snaps are going to be there for him early compared to a few of the guys up top, but I do expect he's going to get some run on offense. The Seahawks are going to find ways to get him involved, some in the passing game. I just don't know that Torrey Horton, and more so than Torrey Horton, I think Torrey Horton's got a chance to be receiver number 3. And capping off the list, I've got Nick Emanwari at number 3 on my list. He'd be higher if I thought there was a starting job available for him on day one. But I still think he's going to play a lot of snaps as a third safety with Kobe Bryant and Julian Love. You can play him in the box. You can play him as a big nickel. You can play him in both safety positions. I think that Nick Emanwari is going to be an impact player, even if he's not a starter on day one. And I actually have Robbie Oots at number 2 because not only do I think he's going to win the fullback job and he's going to play quite a few snaps on offense, Oots is going to play a lot of special teams too. I think they're going to find ways to get this guy on the field as much as they can with his physicality, his toughness, his athleticism for a player of his size. I think Robbie Oots is the guy that's got a chance to be a major impact player on day one because the position he's going to be playing, the spot that he's at is a very unique one for today's NFL, playing fullback, and he's also a good special teams player. And naturally, Gray Zabel's got to be number one. It would take a massive failure on his part to not be the starter at left guard. He is going to be playing on day one for the Seahawks on this offensive line. And that by itself lends itself for him being number one here. And I just think that he has the most talent. They wouldn't have picked him in the first round if they didn't feel that way. To me, he is the player that is going to have the best shot to come in and be an instant impact contributor for this football team, as he should be, being the 16th pick in the NFL draft. Actually, the 18th, 16th was the year before, 18th pick in the NFL draft. When we come back, going to shift gears to OTA previews. We've got wide receivers, a much different looking receiver room. That'll be coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free. Share it with your network and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: adding the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. The NFL Draft is way in the rearview mirror, but the roster moves and news never stop. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. OTA is set to kick off next week on May 27th. They've got 3 practices scheduled at the VMAC for the Seahawks. Continuing our position-by-position overview, heading into the final phase of the offseason program, staying on the offensive side of the ball and going to the wide receiver position. This has been a dramatically altered group, not as much as quarterback. Quarterback's got all brand new players, if you want to consider Drew Lock to be brand new after a year with the New York Giants. Previously was Geno Smith's backup in Seattle for 2 years. Receiver would be next in line in terms of positions that had major changes. And the 2 most notable moves, trading DK Metcalf at his request to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a second-round pick and releasing Tyler Lockett as a cap casualty to save a bunch of money against the cap. Both those moves, you're releasing 2 of the best receivers in franchise history, letting them both go. And then Seattle turned around and signed Cooper Kupp off waivers from the Rams. And then they also brought in Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who has been in the league for a while, previously played for offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak last year in New Orleans. This is now Jackson Smith-Njigba's group, the most talented receiver left from the original big 3. Now that Metcalf's at Pittsburgh, Lockett has signed in Tennessee. Seattle will see both those guys this year in road games in Nashville and Pittsburgh. Jackson Smith-Njigba, clearly receiver number 1. Cooper Kupp, if he is able to stay healthy, that's been the biggest question the last several years. If he's able to stay healthy, he is your number 2. Both him and Smith-Njigba are not just slot receivers. I think Seattle's going to find ways to be able to execute offensively with both of them on the field together. Valdez-Scantling is truly your deep threat. He is a one-trick pony. He's been pretty darn good at it throughout the course of his career. He's had some drops, inconsistencies, but he has the speed and the big playability to take the top off the defense. And a couple of other returning veterans, Jake Bobo and Derek Young. I'm interested how Derek Young is going to fit in here just because he has not been able to carve out a spot on offense in his first 3 seasons. He's got 2 career catches. The athleticism is documented. The guy is one of the most athletic players in Seattle's receiving core, but he hasn't been able to contribute much on offense, and now he's going to have to deal with Torrey Horton as well as Ricky White III, 2 guys coming from Division I schools who are far more polished receivers than what Young was coming from Lenore-Ryan. Those guys are going to be coming in pushing for snaps immediately on offense. So Tyrice Young, he could be up against the wall now. He's been a really good special teams player, but Ricky White and Torrey Horton both are coming into the league known for their special teams ability. So can he maintain a spot? OTAs are going to be key for him. Can he stay up in the pecking order with these newcomers that have come in, particularly the draft picks, Horton and White? And Jake Bobo, everybody that's worked with him to this point loves him. He's a guy that grows on you. His size, his route running ability compensates for the fact that he is not the most explosive athlete. And when he's had his opportunities, he's made plays. Last year, though, he was not involved in the offense very much, aside from a couple of games where the Seahawks gave him a little bit more run. He might be a player that still has a chance to be a significant contributor on offense just because he's got size that few of the players the Seahawks have at receiver have. And he's got the trust of the quarterbacks. Drew Lock will certainly know how to throw to him. And I think Sam Darnold will like Jake Bobo. So I'd feel better if I'm Bobo than Tyrice Young at this point, based on the fact Bobo's been much more productive when he's had his opportunities on offense. And he's also been a pretty good special teams player. When you look at the rest of the depth chart, away from the rookies, Torrey Horton and Ricky White, the third being the draft picks, Cody White's back. I thought Cody White played pretty well in limited action last year, made a couple of big plays in the first loss to the Rams that put Seattle in a position to win. And unfortunately, turnovers in the red zone killed him in that game. Steven Sims Jr. coming over from Houston. He's bounced around a little bit in the league, but he has a track record as being a really good punt returner in the NFL. So he very well could be in the mix for a roster spot if he's able to stand out in the return game. And then you have former quarterback converted receiver John Reese Plumlee, formerly of UCF and Ole Miss. He's in his second year in that transition. I did not see a ton during the rookie minicamp, but we'll see how he looks in the offseason program, OTAs going into training camp. And a couple of undrafted rookies, Montori Foster Jr., Tyrone Broden, the 6'5 target out of Arkansas. And they just signed Nate McCullum, who was a return specialist and a receiver at North Carolina. They added him to the roster earlier this week. So they got plenty of young rookies that are going to be in there looking for opportunities to compete. They'll get their opportunities in preseason and training camp. But I really look at this, what happens after Jackson Smith-Njigba and Cooper Kupp, because to me, those guys are 1 and 2. That is your battery, your first two receivers. And you're going to have a lot of two receiver sets because there's going to be two back sets and multiple tight end sets, aplenty in Clint Kubiak's offense. You still got to have at least 4 really solid receivers, though. So I see Marquez Valdez-Scantling going against Torrey Horton. Is Horton going to be able to get on the field during OTAs so that he can start to compete with Marquez Valdez-Scantling? That's going to be the biggest question. He really didn't do much other than catch passes off of a jugs machine during rookie minicamp. If he's able to start running around and doing some things in OTAs, he can start pushing into that competition with Valdez-Scantling. And then I think you have to look at Jake Bobo, Tyrice Young, and Ricky White III. Maybe you can throw Cody White's hat in there as well for that other receiving spot. And Ricky White III has had 2 straight 1,000-yard seasons at UNLV. I don't think he's just a special teams guy. He can play on offense. He can make plays as a receiver, can create some downfield and after the catch. He's going to be an immediate threat for Jake Bobo and for Tyrice Young, who, again, he's got to prove himself. We haven't seen him do much on offense in his first 3 years in the league. And then Cody White has been that journeyman that's bounced around. He's done some good things when he's gotten his chances, but he's mostly been a practice squad guy. Is he going to be able to stand out in year 2 with McDonald with a different offensive staff? Is he going to be a player that Kubiak and staff gravitate to, or does he push down the pecking order in favor of guys that they have brought in that are their own receivers, including the draft picks? So that's where I think the competitions really lie that we're going to start seeing unfold here in OTAs. Cooper Kupp, Jackson Smith-Njigba, that's your 1 and 2. But I don't think it's a given that Valdez-Scantling's receiver 3. I think a healthy Torrey Horton can very well push for that. And I think that Jake Bobo and to an even greater extent, Tyrice Young, like Ricky White III's coming in with a really impressive resume, and he has more athletic juice than Bobo. The production's certainly better than Tyrice Young coming out of college in a really underrated Mountain West Conference. I just think that you're going to have a very wide open race there. You get 5 names for, maybe 3 or 4 roster spots, depending on how much special teams is added into this. You could have 6 receivers on the roster because of special teams, even if they're not going to be playing as many of them on offense in Clint Kubiak's system. So I'm really curious to see how this plays out. To me, the first two guys are set in stone. And then after that, you could have a lot of shakeups here over the next few months, including training camp, as they try to figure out that pecking order from spot 3 and on at the receiver spot. And special teams will obviously be a key component of that. When I return, I'm going to continue our OTA preview, going to the defensive side of the ball. There's actually some continuity at linebacker, at least at the top. Going to be looking at how depth could still potentially be an issue. That's coming up next here on our Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. OTAs set to kick off for the Seahawks next week on May 27th. As we draw closer, we're reviewing all the position groups coming out of the draft, out of free agency for the Seahawks, and going back to the defensive side of the football. This time last year when we were talking about linebackers, Seattle had signed Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson to one-year contracts. So there was questions about long-term. These guys were both getting their chance to show that they can be a multi-year starter in Seattle. Neither one of them finished the season with the Seahawks. Baker was involved in the trade to acquire Ernest Jones from the Titans before the deadline. And then before the bye week ended, Seattle released Tyrell Dodson, and he landed with the Miami Dolphins. Neither one of them lasted the entire season, so there was a lot of upheaval at that spot. But now Seattle's going into this year with a much different feeling. They've got both of their projected starters under contract together for at least the next 3 seasons in Ernest Jones, who signed a 3-year contract days before free agency started to stay in Seattle. And then Tyrice Knight still got 3 years left on his rookie deal, played a lot of snaps as a 4th-round pick out of UTEP last season, and played really well in the second half, coinciding with Seattle's rise to being a top 10 scoring defense. Both these guys were a key part of that. So those are going to be your starters to open the season. Seattle doesn't have any questions about long-term. I mean, maybe you wonder, could we upgrade from Tyrice Knight? That might still be a discussion Seattle has down the line. But I can tell you from talking to people in the building, there's a lot of excitement about what Tyrice Knight is going to be able to do in his second season and beyond. They really think that he is a long-term starter along with Ernest Jones. So from that perspective, you are going into OTAs without those question marks. Well, do we have starters that are going to be starters for this entire season? Are they worth keeping around beyond this point? You have both these guys, Jones and Knight, under contract through the 2028 season. So this is a really nice opportunity, it's actually 2027 season. You have a real nice opportunity here to go into the season with that continuity and familiarity. These two guys played a lot of snaps together last year. They should be able to hit the ground running now in year 2 in Mike Macdonald's system. Where I think the questions come into play is behind them. And continuity is still there. Drake Thomas, Patrick O'Connell, and Josh Ross were all on the team last year. And Thomas and O'Connell have been with the team the last couple of years as undrafted rookies. They got Thomas off waivers from the Raiders. O'Connell they brought in immediately after the draft a few years ago, and he's gotten to play some snaps on defense and special teams for the Seahawks. And Ross was signed midway through the season last year. Mike Macdonald knows him from their time together at Michigan. He's primarily a special teams player. From my understanding, and this is dating back to last year too, when Drake Thomas was coming off a serious knee injury, and he was able to return midway through training camp. Seattle's very high on him, and he got to play some snaps during the course of the year in nickel sets. Instead of Tyrice Knight, Seattle rotated him in. I don't know that we're going to see the Seahawks doing that this year, but they had the confidence in him to do that. So to me, Drake Thomas, he's linebacker number 3. O'Connell just hasn't been a guy that we've gotten to see much on Sundays. There's been a few opportunities. He's one of those guys that's looked really good in preseason games, and he's looked good in training camp, but we haven't seen can he do it in the regular season, really. He's had a few special team snaps, so there's still questions there. And Josh Ross, again, he's a special teams player almost exclusively. He hasn't really gotten reps at linebacker. So that's where, to me, the wild card here. I thought Jackson Woodard coming out of UNLV was going to be the wild card, and Seattle cut him. And then they signed De'Aaron Jackson from Kentucky, who has been a really good player against SEC competition. 4.51 speed at 237 pounds. When he's been healthy, has been very productive. The health has been the biggest issue. He's had 2 serious injuries that have ended seasons early for him at Kentucky. And I think if he wouldn't have had those injuries, he's probably drafted. And Seattle wouldn't have had him in there as a tryout player. He would have been drafted by somebody. But the injury concerns were a big issue looking at his profile coming into the draft. And he was not an all SEC player, in part because he missed so many games for a couple of those seasons. But he played at that level when he was healthy. And so I think that Derek Jackson, with his size, his speed, his tackling ability, he was a really good cover linebacker at Kentucky. There are a lot of traits and there's a lot of skills there that would fit in the NFL. So if I'm Josh Ross or Patrick O'Connell or maybe even Drake Thomas, I'm looking in the rearview mirror because Derek Jackson could be a guy who ends up coming in for OTAs and continues to impress. Clearly, the Seahawks liked what they saw in rookie minicamp because they moved on from Jackson Woodard really quickly so that they could sign him. They viewed him as the better option. I could see Jackson being the true dark horse in this position group because there are question marks behind the top 2 guys. You don't have a lot of experience in regular season games between the 3 players that are behind them in the depth chart. So they don't have that advantage much over Derek Jackson coming from Kentucky, where he played against top-notch competition in the SEC. Jackson's a player as long as he stays healthy. That's been his biggest issue dating back to high school. If he's healthy, that is the guy to keep a close eye on that might be able to switch things up a little bit at this linebacker spot. And I would not be surprised if we see Seattle add another player at this position during OTAs or at some point before or during training camp. It is a position that still could have another player or 2 that come into the fold. And it might be a spot Seattle looks at after waivers, but that's way down the line. We'll see what happens before then. But I can see Jackson being a player that makes things interesting. Drake Thomas is a guy that I think absolutely can play on Sundays. We have yet to see very many snaps for him, though, in the regular season. He's had more than O'Connell. O'Connell is really a curiosity at this point beyond what he has done in preseason games and in training camp. And I want to throw one more name out here that we learned from Coach Mike McDonald at rookie minicamp. He actually was performing at rookie minicamp because he was eligible. Jamie Sheriff was an edge rusher last year that Seattle signed midway through training camp, and then he had outstanding games in the preseason. Seattle cut him. Carolina claimed him off waivers. He was cut a couple weeks later. He ended up back with the Seahawks on their practice squad. The Seahawks are trying to see if he can play inside linebacker, something he did not do at the college level. So it's kind of a Frankenstein project of sorts where you're trying to see, is he able to make that transition where he can play a position he has not played? He has been exclusively an edge defender. Can he play that off-ball position? We'll see where he fits into this mix as well. But Mike McDonald made it clear they were looking at him there. And that was part of the reason they had him participate in rookie minicamp, so he could get more reps at that position wearing number 44. They've got him numbered, and they've got him doing some stuff at both positions. So I'm curious to see where he ends up fitting into it. But again, this is a position I can see Seattle adding a piece or 2 at some point. Maybe they stick with the group they have right now. The starters they're really happy with Tyrice Knight and Ernest Jones. They've just got to figure out who is the most reliable guy that we have in case one of those guys goes down. Who is the player that we trust to play on Sundays if we need a replacement? And I think special teams is always going to be a big component of who ends up making this team, whether they keep 4 or 5 or even 6 off-ball linebackers. Special teams is going to be a big part of that. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to ensure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee. He'll be back on the show for the first time in a while. Nick and I are going to be diving into some best case and worst case scenarios for a number of Seahawk players heading into the 2025 season, and OTAs opening next week. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Go Hawks.